It is starting to become a political crisis within a national one. The question for the government has been repeatedly asked. Why are so few tests still being done, particularly of NHS staff?
Hospital trusts and other trusts on the front line have the infrastructure in place. They've got the labs, they've got the testing facilities, they've got the drive-through units in some places. They just need those supplies in order to make them work.
The Prime Minister said tonight testing is the way out of the coronavirus puzzle. But what is the government's overall strategy? Or to put it another way, when and how do we ever get back to normal? Also on News at 10 tonight. More than 500 dead today as the overall crisis deepens and the families and friends mourn those they've lost, including a 13-year-old boy. The government tells the banks taxpayers saved you last time. Now it is your turn to help.
And it would be completely unacceptable if any banks were unfairly refusing funds to good businesses in financial difficulty.
And we saw his face in an uncrowded place.
Hello, this is James Blunt, in lockdown in Ibiza.
Blunt and Bonneville with tales from the lockdown.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. It does not get any easier to say this, quite the reverse. We saw today the biggest rise yet in the number of UK deaths from the coronavirus, well over 500 more in all. And as those numbers rise, it isn't getting any easier either to explain why so few NHS workers have been tested, particularly as 1 in 4 doctors is isolating at home still, desperate to get back to work. Government scientists confirmed today that only 2,000 have been tested in England, another 1,500 in Wales, out of an NHS workforce of more than 1 million. As for the rest of us, the scientists from Imperial College London, who've been advising the government, say 1.8 million people could already have had it. And yet, of course, we can't be sure of that either.
It's what NHS staff have been asking for weeks. This is a drive-through coronavirus testing site in London for health workers. It may look impressive, but those trying to get tested here are far from impressed.
And we've been here since just after 12 queuing, it's now 1, and we'd moved about 3 or 4 cars forward in an hour, and there's probably 20 in front of us, so I don't know what the problem is. I mean, my wife could swab herself if they'd pass her the thing. She could do it in 2 minutes.
The government's now told hospital trusts to test as many staff members as possible, as well as patients. Dr. Nima Gadiri works in a major London hospital. His cough means he's been self-isolating for 14 days, but hasn't heard anything about getting a test.
I mean, it's a mixture of disappointment and anger, really, because they've been saying Matt Hancock, the health minister, has been saying for over a month that, they're going to bring in testing, but it just seems to be a repetition of kind of hope that it's going to come in without it actually being delivered.
We were told today it will be delivered.
The intention there, as I say, is to go from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. That will have to go on the basis of the priority that is identified as to which of these workers are actually needed. When I say workers, they're really staff or colleagues, are needed in which settings, particularly where the sickest patients are.
Ministers say there'll be 25,000 tests a day available by mid-April. Capacity now is around half that, under 13,000, but in the past 24 hours, fewer than 10,000 actually took place. The Department of Health says a total of almost 153,000 people have been tested since the crisis began, but only around 2,000 frontline NHS staff have been tested. But the body that represents hospital trusts claims getting hold of testing kits has become a problem as shortages cripple the system.
Hospital trusts and other trusts on the front line have the infrastructure in place. They've got the labs, they've got the testing facilities, they've got the drive-through units in some places. They just need those supplies in order to make them work.
This mammoth temporary hospital about to open in London illustrates just how crucial it is to test health workers and get them back to work. With 4,000 beds, it'll need 16,000 members of staff.
The resource that is scarce is a critical care nurse, and critical care doctor, particularly the critical care nurse, there will be a need to change the nursing model that we have traditionally used, where one critical care nurse looks after one critical care patient. And we're going to have to change that so they've got oversight of more patients, maybe even up to 6 patients at a time.
When this place opens, and indeed as the crisis deepens, every NHS worker will be crucial. Only by testing them can we ensure they can work. Emily Morgan, News at 10.
Well, with criticism growing over testing, or the lack of it, the Prime Minister got involved this evening. He tweeted a video message from his Downing Street isolation saying testing was the way to defeat the virus.
We're also massively increasing testing. And I want to say a special word about testing because it is so important. And as I've said for weeks and weeks, this is the way through. This is how we will unlock the coronavirus puzzle. This is how we will defeat it in the end.
And Robert is with us once again from self-isolation at home still, like the Prime Minister, ahead of his programme later on. Robert, you'll have heard what the Prime Minister said. I think this testing business, or lack of it, is inexplicable to an awful lot of people.
So there is obviously a very big division at the top of the government operation to protect us from this awful virus. You just heard the Prime Minister saying that testing is so important and it is the way to defeat the virus in the end. Now, on my show, coming up at 11:15, we interview the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, and he said, and I'm going to quote you, that testing is a bit of a side issue, to be truthful with you, because he believes that social distancing, staying in our homes, keeping away from each other, is infinitely more important. And there's another really important division at the top of the medical establishment, which is about the nature of testing. Now, I learned today that the government has paid in full for 1 million tests from China that are arriving here in the next few days. Now, these are blood tests that test for 2 kinds of antibodies, and there are scientists who believe not only will they be able to test people who may or may not have had the virus and tell whether they're immune, but that would not probably take place for till a few weeks from now, but they are also able to test people immediately who are showing symptoms and tell whether or not those people have COVID-19, which most people would think would be incredibly valuable in the NHS, particularly since 1 million of these things are turning up. But what nobody can explain to me is why Public Health England, which has had access to these tests for a couple of weeks, has not yet been able to determine whether or not the government has simply wasted its money, several £1 million on these tests, or whether they can be rolled out in a matter of days to allow NHS staff safely to go back to work. As I say, the picture at the moment, I'm afraid, is one of confusion right at the top of the operation, the government, to help us through this crisis.
Robert, thank you. It is rather baffling. I think we can all agree about the importance of testing, and staying at home was illustrated by those figures on the number of UK deaths. The latest recorded increase was a shocking 563, which takes the total above 2,000 to 2,352. And Tom is here, of course, out of self-isolation. I'm very pleased to say welcome back to the studio. You may wish you weren't here, but never mind.
Good to be back.
Listen, just trying to put all this together. I think a lot of people are sitting at home and they're probably thinking, as maybe a lot of us are, look, we know this lockdown is going to last 2 or 3 months. And yes, when we come out of it, some of us will know we've had it and we'll be able to go on with life as normal. But what about the rest of it? How does the government's strategy across the year go, and what is the passage back to normal life?
I think the totally honest answer is that they're still trying to work that through. We don't know how rapidly the social distancing measures we put in already are going to work. The honest answer is it's going to be a combination of various things. If you ask the purists, just self-isolation alone, the Jonathan Van Tam you just heard about there, people who are proposing self-isolation, if you took the Victorian approach to that, we are going to be in lockdown in order to sort of protect the NHS and reduce the outbreak until November, if you want to do that properly. But, you know, let's face it, I've just spent 2 weeks at home, and my mental health or physical health, let alone the economy, could not handle that. We know that. So that's obviously not an option the government has available to itself. However, if we let everyone back out in May, all right, we may have had a few 100,000 cases in the UK undetected. That's still a fraction of the UK population. We would have a massive second peak that would come through that. You can't have that either. So one approach, and the Americans are looking at this, I know these discussions are ongoing in our government, do you have a pulsed approach? Do you either geographically over time put on and off those restrictions to try and ease the burden? But that's also forgetting the fact we've got another trick up our sleeve, which is testing. And the Prime Minister was right to a point. If you do tests, it's possible, if you could do an antibody test of people, figure out who's immune, you might be able to let some of us return into society, for want of a better word, knowing that we're immune, could take some of the burden off the social distancing. It's still to be arranged, but we are in this for the long haul. There is no doubt about it.
Well, it is the strangest of times, Tom. Speak very soon. Thank you very much. Now, after such a large, shockingly large number of new deaths in the latest figures, there are now more than 2,000 families grieving a victim of the virus, of course, among them the mother and 6 brothers and sisters of 13-year-old Ismail Mohammed Abdul Wahab from London, who died alone, as many others have, in the early hours of Monday. They put out a statement saying how heartbroken they were by what they called the devastation of coronavirus.
Every life lost to the invisible killer represents a tragedy. And we now know that no one is completely safe. While most of those it claims are the elderly and the vulnerable, Mohammed Mutlib today told us about his family friend Ismail, just 13 when it took him.
There were no underlying symptoms, there were no underlying illnesses that could have even made anyone suspect that he's in real danger.
Ismail Mohammed Abdul Wahab's large family in South London today described him as a loving son, brother and nephew, saying his smile was heartwarming and he was always gentle and kind. But tragically, the family weren't able to say goodbye to him.
No one else is allowed to be around that individual, and that means you're on your deathbed in your last moments alone. And he was a young boy, age 13, without his mother, without any sibling on his deathbed in the last moments. And that's very hard to sort of digest and really understand as to how lonely and how sad that moment must have been.
20 years a nurse at Goodmayes Hospital in the capital, Thomas Harvey died after contracting the virus.
My dad was a really selfless person. He always put others before himself.
A devoted father of 7, he told his family about his concern at the level of protective equipment.
He expressed to my mum that they had a lack of PPE and that they had flimsy aprons and just flimsy gloves. It was a case of that he just didn't feel protected and he didn't feel safe on the ward.
Just as sad and worrying in its own way is the death of Doreen Hunt, mother, grandmother and great-grandmother, who because of her kidney condition followed all the guidance.
My mum was careful. She was isolating for weeks before this happened. She was using all the sanitisers because she was on home dialysis. So she was extra careful, and yet still, somewhere, somehow, she's picked it up.
Every day brings more death and more heartbroken families, underlining how much we have left to learn about the killer in our midst. Paul Davis, News at 10.
Well, we've all had to get used to some pretty extraordinary and frankly alarming changes to our lives. As individuals, we are isolating or trying to, and I suppose in a peculiar way you could perhaps say the world is coming together in locking down. But it is worth pausing for a moment to reflect on what has happened over the last 10 days. The world has, by and large, just stopped. This is Moscow's Red Square, for example, normally full of tourists, even in winter. Now there are just a couple of ambling security officials with, as you can see, not much to do. Or how about Rome? This is the Colosseum, normally one of the busiest tourist destinations in the world. No traffic too in Dubai, shopping centre of the Middle East. Its normally busy streets abandoned, the usual hordes of late-night browsers a distant memory. This is Paris, and the Eiffel Tower, of course, still lit up in France's darkest of hours and where all is eerily quiet. And this is Madrid's central square, the Puerta del Sol, where the lockdown is now total and most streets are deserted. And this, of course, New York, arguably the heartbeat of global capitalism. If we have never witnessed anything quite like it, the economic consequences are as yet unknowable. No wonder then that in Washington the president has prepared his country, which is already experiencing distressing scenes, for what he called the roughest 2 or 3 weeks it has ever had.
In New York, these are the distressing scenes outside some of the hospitals. There is little dignity as the state grapples with a mounting death toll that is tonight nearing 2,000. Hospital staff are under immense and growing pressure, fearing most of all what lies ahead. Dr. Eric Blutinger is on that front line, working at Mount Sinai Hospital, and telling News at 10 of the frightening conditions there.
The fear is palpable. Every single day, it's like going into war. It's unimaginable. Unimaginable. I mean, today alone, we had over 300 people die in the New York City area from COVID. We all agree that this is unlike anything we ever hope to see again in our lifetime.
It sounds like a war zone.
It really is. But we are running out of ammo. And there are hospitals in this city that are running out of ammo fast.
The contrast between empty New York streets and the frantic work inside intensive care units is the most striking to the doctors.
But when you walk into an emergency department, you see tons of people waiting to be seen, coughing into masks, others taking their last breaths. It's two completely polar opposite worlds. And the fact that this is only going to get worse in 2 weeks is frightening.
Across America, the National Guard is now being deployed to convert convention centers into makeshift hospitals. This one is in Texas.
We're going through the worst thing that the country's probably ever seen.
The president is adopting a new, much graver tone, warning Americans to brace for what lies ahead.
I want every American to be prepared for the hard days that lie ahead. We're going to go through a very tough 2 weeks. And then hopefully, as the experts are predicting, as I think a lot of us are predicting after having studied it so hard, you're going to start seeing some real light at the end of the tunnel. But this is going to be a very painful, very, very painful 2 weeks.
Tonight, Florida is joining those states enacting a lockdown. That's another 21 million Americans being asked to stay at home. That White House warning that 240,000 Americans might die, even if strong mitigation measures are in place, is having an impact on every corner of this country. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
Well, back here, the coronavirus loans that the government hoped would keep companies going are hitting problems already. Some business owners who can actually get through to the banks, that is, say they are applying terms that they simply can't afford. Well, today at his news conference, the business secretary, Alok Sharma, said it would be completely unacceptable for banks to refuse loans to good businesses after they were bailed out by taxpayers. Joel is here. You can understand why feelings are running high. What is, in essence, what's going on?
Well, look, on the face of it, the government claims there is more than £300 billion of loans available, Tom, interest-free for 12 months, underwritten by the taxpayer, available to banks to ensure they don't run out of cash as we head into a recession. The problem is businesses are saying we're struggling to access them. We apply to our banks as we're told to. The banks are either rejecting them or they're adding additional burdens or requests. It's just not working. The business secretary today ordered the banks to sort it out.
And it would be completely unacceptable if any banks were unfairly refusing funds to good businesses in financial difficulty. Just as the taxpayer stepped in to help the banks back in 2008, we will work with the banks to do everything they can to repay that favour and support the businesses and people of the United Kingdom in their time of need.
So Lord King, the former governor of the Bank of England, says actually there's a design fault with this loan scheme, although he does say, Tom, that it would be helpful if businesses could walk into their local branch. Too many of them are closed. The banks say 80% of the branch network is still open and they're doing the loan scheme as to the terms that are set by the government. There is a blockage here. It needs clearing, or the government is not going to be able to keep businesses in business and people in jobs.
OK, well, you saw the picture of the world we painted there. The world just stopped. What is is there any way of quantifying the economic impact yet?
Well, we're starting to see signs of it. Tonight, we have learned that 950,000 people, Tom, applied for universal credit in the last 2 weeks of March. That's 10 times the number that normally happen in normal times. Across the economy, businesses have been forced to shut down. We expected unemployment to rise, but the scale of this is really breathtaking. Torsten Bell, the chief executive of the Resolution Foundation, says we've never seen anything like this. It's not remotely normal, even in the grim circumstances of a recession. Companies have laid people off, Tom, despite the support that's there from the government. I mean, retailers in the hospitality sector have been right at the sharp end of this. They employ a lot of people. Presumably, they'd let people go instead of keeping them on the payroll. The self-employed have been told taxpayer help is on the way, but not until June. They've been signing on. The good news is the claims are being processed. There is a safety net, but my goodness, a lot of people are using it.
OK. Thank you very much indeed. Now, 2 months ago, Britons were being evacuated from Wuhan in China to escape the virus. Now, China is bringing its citizens, many of them students, home from Britain to do the same. Debbie is in Beijing. Debbie, this is, to state the obvious, something of a turnaround in circumstance, suggesting China now believes its people are a lot safer back home than they are here.
Yes, just 8 weeks ago, the British government was warning Britons to get out of China amid concerns about healthcare provision here. The Chinese government at the time saying such evacuations were unnecessary and irrational, but here they are helping evacuate 188 Chinese school pupils from the UK. Their parents paying to charter a flight to bring them back to the safety of China. On Friday, Britain is now accounting for a third of imported cases into China, including a Chinese student who has re-imported COVID-19 to Wuhan. He tested positive despite not showing any symptoms and is among 1,367 asymptomatic cases reported in the country, all of those people being held in quarantine. The country deciding to include these asymptomatic cases after pressure and concerns from the government about these symptomless spreaders. And although this kind of transparency, of course, is to be welcomed, what this further change in the Chinese counting system will do is make it even harder to measure the scale of this pandemic when eventually it is all over.
OK, Debbie, thank you very much. More than a week on from the Prime Minister telling medically vulnerable people to stay indoors and not come out to shield themselves, we have learned that a quarter have no one to help them with shopping. The boss of Iceland Supermarkets told us he is still waiting for a list from the government of those people so they can prioritise delivery slots. And he has another message for the government too: suspend the Sunday trading laws to give people more time to go shopping.
Love brought them together and must now keep them apart. With terminal cancer, Simon Cowles is so vulnerable to coronavirus, he's isolated away from his wife in a camper van.
You have to have faith and you have to remain positive. And that's tough. It's tough at the moment.
Have the supermarkets been able to prioritise people in your position?
We spent hour after hour after hour on the phone, and that's just us. For the thousands of other people that are in this situation, I don't know how they must be feeling and thinking.
They're among the first to get a free government food parcel, but most in this position haven't had one, don't know when they might. Some of Britain's top supermarket bosses now want a change in government policy to help vulnerable people unable to shop.
If you are fit, if you don't fall within the highly vulnerable category, if you adhere to social distancing guidelines, then my view is that, contrary to what the Prime Minister said on his address of last Monday, you should go out to stores because that will free up slots for the most vulnerable customers.
Do you now require some assistance, for example, in easing of the Sunday trading laws, whereby the big supermarkets have reduced hours on a Sunday?
We have spoken to government about this. My hands are still tied with these archaic Sunday trading laws. This is a moment of national crisis and we need our shops open.
Government has a list of 1.5 million extremely vulnerable people who can't go to the shops. One supermarket has told us the data shows 400,000 of them lack support from family or neighbours. Only about 50,000 from the list will get government food parcels this week, but all 400,000 should get one within weeks. Fazile Hadi is blind. She's getting help to shop, but says others are becoming desperate.
I think things are getting quite grim. I think they're getting through what food they did have, and I think they definitely need help. And the worry is that some of these people won't be the people that speak out. They'll be the people who are silent.
It's now urgent that the most vulnerable and now most isolated are heard in this crisis. Chris Choi, News at 10.
If staying in is the new going out, then perhaps it is time to celebrate the interesting things that are starting to happen outside our windows. Postmen and women in fancy dress, fitness classes on the road, and visits from ponies for children whose medical conditions prevent them being allowed out. It gives a whole new meaning to the phrase street entertainers.
On this street in a small town in Cheshire, this is now normal. At 11 o'clock every morning, all the residents come out onto their doorsteps and dance together, while observing safe social distancing, of course. It was all Elsa's idea. She wanted to combine getting a bit of exercise with helping everyone be a bit more friendly.
It's good from a health point of view physically, but the main benefit is from the community's point of view, mental health, well-being, getting people out, smiling, cheering everybody up a bit. That's what it's all about.
Now, nobody's saying this would definitely work on every street in the UK, but here in Frodsham, they are loving it. Ask anyone from 2 metres away.
We've all come out. We've seen neighbours that usually just pass us in the car and don't speak. So it's been really good to bring people together.
Being stuck indoors is especially trying for children, and even more so if they're trying to celebrate their birthday, which is why James from a stables in Middlesex is trying to bring a little bit of celebration to their doorstep by letting his pony Whiz come and say hello.
Hello. You're right.
But if you live in Stockport, it's not a pony you'll be seeing, it's Spider-Man, emerging from a suburban front door to walk the streets for hours, morning and afternoon.
Hey!
Saying hello to people stuck indoors.
Stay inside!
Like these three, who goodness knows need a break from their maths homework, though Imogen wishes he'd speak up a bit.
We stay indoors all the time, we can't hear him.
You can't hear him?
Because we just watch from the inside.
Spider-Man's never been seen in the same room as the popular local martial arts teacher Jason Baird, and if you think your lockdown is hard, spare a thought for the person who'll be washing his Spider-Man suit twice a day for as long as this lasts. Damon Green, News at 10 in Stockport.
Well, if that doesn't raise a smile, maybe this will. Finally, ever wonder what famous singers or actors are getting up to while no records are being recorded or films being made? Well, the singer James Blunt and Hugh Bonneville, Downton's Earl Grantham, of course, have both accepted our offer to cheer the rest of us up by telling us what they have been doing in the lock-in. James Blunt first, then.
Hello, this is James Blunt, in lockdown in Ibiza, gathering firewood. Stay home, save lives.
So gathering firewood, in short, while social distancing. And as for Hugh, well, he sent us a slightly longer guide to useful things to do while staying at home and staying safe.
As the days at home have turned into weeks and might possibly become months, I thought I'd share with you some top tips on how to pass the time. Why not shave your head? Because let's face it, you're not going to a barber anytime soon. Next, why not take up some of those unfinished projects? For instance, I've got this overcoat. I'm very fond of it, but it's always had a button missing. I finally tracked down a button and I'm going to sew it on. But the thing I'm most excited about is this tapestry. I started it some time ago when my wife's sister got engaged. I thought it would make a lovely wedding present. As you can see, I finished about 70 or 80% of it. Unfortunately, my sister-in-law and her husband are about to celebrate their 23rd wedding anniversary. I think it's about time I finished it. This is Hugh Bonneville, ITN, on the road from procrastination to action, we're Sussex.
All of which leaves me with the question, do I go the full Bonneville with my hair, as it perhaps should be known? Watch this space. That's it. Good night and thank you for watching.